Welcome everyone. I'm Maureen McMullen. I'm a marketing specialist with FlutterBee. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn more about science of reading in the library. Just a heads up, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send the recording out to everyone who registered just in case you have to head out early or you want to share it with someone else. And if you have any questions during Ric's presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat and we'll have a few minutes at the end for a Q&A. After the webinar, we'll send out the slides and recommended title list along with the recording. So any of the resources you see here, we will send right to you. A little bit about our presenter, Ric. Dr. Ric Hasenyager is the Vice President of Classroom Solutions here at FlutterBee. Before he was with FlutterBee, he served as the Director of Library Services for the New York City Department of Education and Northeast Independent School District in Texas. Ric completed his PhD in Information Science at the University of North Texas and has been an adjunct faculty member there and at Sam Houston State University. We are so lucky to have Ric's expertise and knowledge at FlutterBee, and we're so excited to share it with all of you today. And with that, I will let Ric get started. Ric, I'm so sorry. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Maureen, again. And thank you for the great introduction. And I'm thrilled to be representing FlutterBee. And as we get started today, I just wanted to give a little bit more background of why I found this topic to be so interesting to share today. And that is, I have a friend of mine that's a literacy specialist in an elementary school, and she may actually be one of the attendees today. And she was sharing that she was meeting with teachers, and her middle grade teachers at the elementary school were really talking about how although students seem to be doing better as reading the mechanics of reading, but what they're really lacking is some deeper level comprehension. As they're preparing to come up into the grades. So keep that as a thought in the background of your mind, because I think today's presentation is really going to help attack that problem. And that's also how I want to get started, is to say, I have some refreshing news for you. School librarians who use an inquiry-based approach to learning already align with the science of reading. And today, it's my job to share how this leads to the joy of reading and how we can better communicate our role in supporting structured literacy programs. I also want to begin by stating the obvious, that when many people think of science of reading, they think of phonics instruction or word recognition. But language comprehension, which is sometimes the less obvious the components of becoming a skilled reader, is just as critical. And this is where librarians shine. We do this by curating both fiction and nonfiction, leading discussions, and exposing students to diverse, complex texts. Librarians help weave the upper strands of Scarborough's rope, strengthening students' comprehension skills for lifelong reading success. But before we actually dig too deep into our topic today, I want to take a quick step back and introduce who we are, who FlutterBee is. And you may not know us by the name FlutterBee, but I'm sure you're familiar with our family of brands. Bearport, Bellwether, Jump, Kaleidoscope. These are all related companies prior to creating FlutterBee, the umbrella organization. And this was done just to streamline ordering and provide better service to you. Each of our brands do share some of the values that you've grown to love across our four publishing brands. Our content is kid-friendly and educator-approved. As you look through our offerings, you'll see books written for every reader, with text expertly crafted to match educational needs and to build understanding with high visual appeal. At the same time, we are also committed to inclusion and representation. So with that, I'm going to be sharing some lessons a little later today and in a little bit. And I'm just going to use some of our books as examples. But what I'm sharing today is product agnostic. You can use whatever you already have in your libraries. And so the intent today is really to talk about how we can um, embed tenets of science of reading into what we do. And chances are, when you see what I'm talking about, these are things you're already doing. These are not something new that has to be done. So let's start with a little discussion about what is the science of reading. And just to save my bandwidth, I'm going to turn off my video for now. I'll turn it back on towards the end. So the science of reading is based on decades of research about how the brain learns to read. It supports evidence-based instructional practices that help all students become successful readers. Research tells us that reading is not a natural process, that children don't just pick it up. Instead, they need explicit instruction in the key skills that make reading possible. The science of reading emphasizes 5 essential components: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. These pillars work together to build strong, capable, and skilled readers. At the same time, learning to read should be engaging and meaningful. That's where inquiry-based learning comes in. Encouraging students to ask questions, explore topics, and make connections as they read. Here's the key takeaway. Nonfiction books can reinforce all of these skills within the science of reading. They help build background knowledge. They expand vocabulary and develop comprehension, all while keeping students curious and motivated. As librarians, we can leverage nonfiction to bring science of reading to life. So the science of reading is the research base. But structured literacy is the instructional method. It's the instructional approach that brings the science of reading into practice. It provides systematic, explicit instruction in the 5 essential components of reading. This means skills are taught clearly, structured, building from the simple to the more complex. Structured literacy is essential for all readers, but it's especially critical for those with learning differences such as dyslexia. By providing direct, intentional instruction, we ensure that every student has the tools they need to become a confident reader. Librarians play a powerful role in reinforcing these skills. School libraries support literacy through carefully selected nonfiction books, research opportunities, and student engagement. Nonfiction helps build vocabulary, strengthen comprehension, and encourage curiosity, all of which aligns with structured literacy principles. The key takeaway here is that school librarians can support structured literacy by selecting books that align with these principles and aligning their instructional practices. Here is Scarborough's rope. It depicts a reading as a rope woven from multiple strands, each representing key components that work together to develop reading proficiency. The strands fall into 2 main categories: word recognition and language comprehension, both of which must be developed and integrated for students to become a skilled reader. Why does this matter for librarians? Well, we contribute to both sides of the rope in different ways. Supporting language comprehension through curating nonfiction books to build background knowledge, expanding vocabulary, and teaching students how to navigate text structures is extremely important. But we also curate narrative texts that build comprehension by expanding vocabulary, developing storytelling skills, fostering inferencing, and exposing students to complex language structures. For the other strand, librarians reinforce word recognition by partnering with teachers to offer decodable books, reinforcing phonemic awareness through read-alouds, and supporting early literacy skills. Finally, we build engagement by encouraging reading habits that promote fluency and comprehension through diverse, high-quality texts. As students become skilled readers, they find more enjoyment in what they read as their cognitive barriers are greatly reduced. Now, for the most part, as I talked about in the introduction, when we talk about science of reading, or when we hear others talk about science of reading, we often hear them really only talking about word recognition, those elements of phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition of familiar words. Science of reading is much more than that. And I think this is where we have to do a better job in explaining how we are able to help support our structured literacy practices in our school. Scarborough's work validates the essential role librarians play in literacy development. By providing rich texts, engaging read-alouds, and structured support, librarians strengthen language comprehension and while reinforcing reading engagement, making us an invaluable part of the literacy ecosystem. The science of reading emphasizes explicit instruction in both of those areas. But for students to become lifelong readers, they must also find it to be meaningful and enjoyable. That means the lessons and activities shared today will foster a joy of reading by making literacy engaging, relevant, and interactive through inquiry-based learning activities that allow students to explore topics they care about and to ask their own questions. And then rather than passively receiving information, they actively investigate, analyze, and discuss, making reading exciting. Students engage with high-interest nonfiction books, showing them that reading is more than just stories. It's a way to understand our world. And as an additional note, as I share these lessons, keep in mind that based on your schedules, these lessons may take 2 or 3 sessions to complete. In my library program, it would have taken at least 2 for most of these. So let's dig in how we can put this into practice. So let's take a look at a common topic that we work with students in kindergarten, first grade, and that is around community workers. And in this lesson, What Do Plumbers Do? Is designed to help young students explore the role of community workers through nonfiction texts. As librarians, we can guide them through engaging read-alouds, vocabulary building activities, and interactive projects that reinforce key literacy skills. We'll start by activating prior knowledge by asking our students some open-ended questions like, where have you seen a plumber? What tools do you think they use? How do they help the community? This helps students make connections and to prepare them for their new learning. Next, during the read aloud, we'll highlight key vocabulary words and point out text features like headings, captions, and labeled diagrams. We'll model how to use these features to gather information and encourage students to make the connections between the text and their own experiences. For a mini project, students will choose another nonfiction book about another community worker. They can either draw a picture of that worker in action, they can role play community workers, or they could even act out a charade of how they contribute to the community. This activity allows students to process what they've learned in a creative and meaningful way. Finally, if we are having students record their work, they can share that with a partner, and this allows them to practice oral language skills, reinforcing comprehension and celebrating their learning. By using nonfiction in this way, librarians can support structured literacy while making reading engaging and relevant to our students' lives. Now, as I reflect on when I was a practitioner, when I was working in an elementary library, this is the same type of lesson that I would have used in my library. So I'm not having to change a lot of what I was doing. I just have to frame it a little differently for maybe my school administrator and maybe for my teachers to explicitly point out how I'm supporting the science of reading. And at the same time, I'm engaging my students in very worthwhile actions for them to learn about the content. Now, for a lesson around this, I would need additional resources beyond just the one book I'm sharing. This lesson would require students to self-select a community worker. So you would need to make sure that you pull or point out where those books are to your students. You may have some of these series on your shelves or something similar. This is just to give you some further ideas. This lesson supported multiple strands of language comprehension by using nonfiction texts to build literacy skills. First, it develops background knowledge by helping students learn about real-world jobs and how community helpers contribute to society. Through engaging texts and discussions, students gain a deeper understanding of the essential roles these workers play in their daily lives. Next, it strengthens vocabulary by introducing job-related words like plumber, firefighter, teacher, tools, rescue. Children learn these words in context, which helps to deepen their understanding and retention. The lesson also reinforces language structures by guiding students through nonfiction text features such as headings, labels, and captions. Teaching students how to use these elements builds their awareness of informational text structures, which is a key literacy skill. Finally, verbal reasoning is strengthened through role play and discussion. Encouraging students to act out or talk about different jobs helps them make inferences about these roles and how they matter in a community. By engaging in conversations and interactive activities, students develop deeper critical thinking skills. Now, let's take a look at a lesson for students in grades 2 and 3 to explore how cities evolve over time. In many different curriculum in second or third grade, we have a then and now unit or a past and present. And so we're going to use nonfiction text to build background knowledge and critical thinking skills to help support these standards. We begin by activating prior knowledge. Before reading, we'll ask students what they know, and in this case, we're going to be studying about Beijing, what they know about Beijing. What do they think the city looked like in the past, how it may have changed, and this will help set the stage for deeper learning. Next, we're going to introduce timelines as an important nonfiction text feature. We're going to explain that timelines help us see how events unfold over time, make it easier to understand the city's history and growth. During the read aloud, we'll read about key moments in Beijing's history, pausing to discuss important changes, encouraging students to think about why these changes happen and how they impact the people that live there. Then we're going to lead a class discussion about how Beijing has evolved, how it has stayed the same or changed. For a mini project, students will select a different city to research. They can work individually or with a partner. They'll identify a major change, perhaps a new landmark, population growth, or environmental shift. They will then write either a short paragraph describing the change or create a drawing that illustrates it. Finally, students will share their work. This lesson not only strengthens reading comprehension, but also encourages students to think critically about history, geography, and urban development, all through engaging nonfiction texts. Now, as in the last lesson, you'll need some additional resources for students to complete the lesson. If you don't have the text to support the mini project, consider using web-based resources. Another option is to have students research how things evolve instead of places, like this set of books from a series of past and present. The third set of resources I have here is you may consider using if you want to go deeper into the research process. This series on the screen is more appropriate for grades 3 to 5, so on the upper end of this. The lesson on Beijing strengthens multiple strands of language comprehension too. It builds upon background knowledge by helping students understand historical change by comparing the past with the present. It expands vocabulary by introducing key historical and geographical terms such as dynasty, emperor, revolution, and forbidden city. Learning these words in context helps students connect to new concepts to their existing knowledge. The lesson also reinforces language structures by guiding students to use nonfiction text features like timelines, captions, and indexes. These tools help students navigate informational text, improving their ability to find and interpret historical details. Finally, verbal reasoning is a key component. Students analyze, explain, and justify their thinking about historical change, whether through discussions, writing, or visual projects. By articulating their ideas, they develop critical thinking and communication skills. Through this approach, librarians support structured literacy while making history and nonfiction reading engaging and meaningful for your students. Now, what I really want to point out also is that I'm using the term mini projects. I don't know how many times we started a project in the library and it seemed like students lost a little bit of the momentum when it lasted for a long period of time. Using mini projects like this allows us to do mini research projects. And in addition to using mini projects, we're also looking at using very high interest resources with our students. So in this one, disasters, the Titanic, it helps students explore historical disasters, analyze cause and effect, and engage in critical thinking. It builds background knowledge, vocabulary, and analytical skills through reading, discussion, and comparison activities. We would begin by activating prior knowledge by asking a few questions about the Titanic, what they think about disasters. Next, we would provide additional background information about the Titanic. We would highlight key details such as its construction, maybe its maiden voyage, and what led to the disaster. Then we would do a read aloud. We would focus on key moments in the Titanic's story. We may only decide to read a selection of this book for our students. And so in this case, I would select Disaster Strikes. We would discuss what made the disaster so significant and the lessons learned from it. Then I would lead a class discussion about disasters, both natural, like earthquakes and hurricanes, and man-made, such as shipwrecks and industrial accidents. And we would encourage students to think about common themes. What do disasters have in common? How do they impact the people and communities? To deepen inquiry, pose a guiding question. What makes the Titanic disaster unique compared to other disasters? Encourage students to think critically about the Titanic why the Titanic remains to be one of the most well-known disasters in history. For the mini projects, students will choose a different disaster, either natural or man-made, and compare and contrast it with the Titanic disaster using a Venn diagram. This activity helps them identify similarities and differences, reinforcing comprehension and analytical thinking. Once again, some additional resources. Be sure to pull out any additional books on disasters that you may have in your collections. And in this lesson, we strengthen the multiple strands of language comprehension by using nonfiction to help students analyze historical disasters, expand vocabulary, and engage in critical thinking. You are going to be receiving this PowerPoint as a PDF. So I'm not going to read through everything because I want to respect your time and I want to continue about the next steps in this process, and that explicit library instruction strengthens language comprehension. And these lessons do apply this to that we're not just talking about explicit literacy instruction, but we're also talking about explicit library instruction. As librarians, we do more than just provide books. We provide instruction that strengthens student language comprehension. Through purposeful engagement with nonfiction research and discussion, we help students develop essential reading and critical thinking skills. One way we do this is by ensuring access to nonfiction and research materials. Authentic informational text allows students to explore real-world problems, learn about historical events, scientific discoveries, or social change. Nonfiction deepens their understanding and connects reading to the real world around them. We also teach students how to use text features effectively. Timelines, captions, headings, and indexes help students navigate nonfiction texts and locate key information. By explicitly teaching these tools, we empower students to read with greater confidence and with comprehension. Another key component is inquiry-based learning, encouraging students to research disasters, historical change, or other topics of interest fosters curiosity and makes learning meaningful. Inquiry-driven activities engage students into deeper thinking, helping them draw connections and develop analytical skills. Finally, we strengthen verbal discussion and writing by providing opportunities for students to share their findings, discuss ideas, and write reflections. These activities reinforce comprehension and language structure, helping students organize their thoughts and expressing them clearly. By integrating explicit instruction and nonfiction reading, research, and inquiry, school librarians actively support structured literacy and help students become stronger, more confident learners. Explicit library instruction makes reading joyful. How does it do this? Well, students become detectives, discovering new information rather than just memorizing facts. One of the most powerful things we do as librarians is to make reading joyful. Through explicit library instruction, we help students see reading as an adventure, an opportunity to explore, discover, and connect with the world in meaningful ways. Inquiry-based learning sparks curiosity by making students feel like detectives, uncovering information rather than just memorizing facts. When we guide students' questions and seek for answers, reading becomes an active process full of excitement and discovery. We also make it hands-on. Whether it's researching a historical event, creating a project, or role-playing a real-world scenario, we turn reading into an experience. This makes literacy engaging, helping students view books as tools for exploration rather than assignments to complete. Student choice is a key to engagement. When students have the freedom to explore topics that interest them, they feel a sense of ownership over their learning. In each of these lessons, we provided students with choice. This personal connection keeps them invested and motivated. And let's not forget about the power of nonfiction. When students see how reading connects to real-world events, discoveries, and innovations, nonfiction becomes exciting. It helps them understand the world in new ways. Finally, social learning makes reading fun. Through discussion, debate, and collaboration, students realize that reading isn't just about the words on the page. It's about sharing ideas, solving problems, and thinking critically together. How does this create joy? Students become detectives of problems to be solved, piecing together information, drawing conclusions, and discovering knowledge for themselves. By making reading an interactive, inquiry-driven, and collaborative experience, librarians help students develop a lifelong love of learning. As we wrap up, let's take a step back and look at the bigger pictures. Libraries are more than just places to check out books. They are hubs for critical thinking, inquiry-based learning, and deep comprehension. By aligning with the science of reading and incorporating structured literacy and Scarborough's reading rope into library programming, we help students build content knowledge through nonfiction texts, making connections across subjects. We help students develop strong vocabulary and reading comprehension skills, reinforcing structured literacy practices. We help students think critically about history, science, and the real-world topics, preparing them to become informed learners. And we help students become confident, independent researchers who know how to ask the right questions, to find reliable, truthful information, and form their own conclusions. What's important to remember is that school librarians have been doing this work for years. We've always supported literacy by helping students build knowledge, develop vocabulary, and think critically. The science of reading and structured literacy don't replace what we do. They validate and strengthen it. By leveraging nonfiction, teaching students how to navigate informational texts, and fostering a love of research, librarians are at the forefront of literacy instruction. We are not just supporting readers, we are empowering thinkers, creating problem solvers, and lifelong learners. The work that you do matters, Keep bridging the gap between books and deeper comprehension, because when we connect students to knowledge, we open doors to their future. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. And I want to share my contact information with you so that we may be able to continue the conversation again in the future. At this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Maureen, who will moderate any questions that you may have. You please use the Q&A tool for any questions. If we get more questions than we have time, we will respond to you in an email with an answer to your question. Maureen, be sure to unmute. There you go.
Thank you so much, Rick. We do have a few minutes to answer some questions, and we do have a few. Rick, here is our first question. I understand what you said, but my school only allows K through 2 students to read decodable books. What do I do in my case?
I've heard this before. This is not new to me. I'm sure for some of you, this isn't new for you either. And I think what we have to do a better job is to talk about what the science of reading tells us and what the research says, is that there is a portion that we're talking about teaching students how to read. But even at the youngest age, they need to build their knowledge. They need to build vocabulary. They need to work on comprehension. It just means that we might do more activities where we're reading text to students as read alouds. And it may be that we're also finding some additional high interest, maybe decodable books that are out in the market that we can include in our libraries. But for research projects like this, it just means that you may have to do them more as full group lessons and activities. But I would actually ask you to challenge your leadership at your school and say, but what are we doing to support this other strand of the science of reading? Because I have a feeling that schools that after 2 to 3 years of adopting science of reading or structured literacy programs in their schools, what they're going to be seeing is that after 2 to 3 years, teachers are really going to start pushing back, especially in those middle grades, like I was describing earlier, that they're going to tell their principal, yeah, they may be able to read, but they don't know how to think. They don't comprehend what they're reading. And part of our job is to help cross that barrier. Is there another question?
Yes, thank you, Rick. So our next question is, how can librarians advocate for their role in supporting the science of reading when working with administration and teachers?
Can you repeat that again? I started one direction and then went another. So can you please repeat that question again?
Absolutely. How can librarians advocate for their role in supporting the science of reading when working with administrators and teachers?
So I think a part of advocating is it's twofold. One is through our own instructional practices, that we invite our administrators into our library when we're working with students. Um, Oftentimes, where you might be towards the bottom of their list to come and visit, but make sure that you offer a time and say, hey, I'm working with so-and-so's class this afternoon, third grade. I have an exciting thing that we're working on that is supporting our structured literacy program, or aligns with science of reading, and I want to show you how this happens. So one is through practice, but the other is to make sure that you're doing regular check-ins with your administrators, that you find time that you talk about how the library program supports the initiatives, that you are able to demonstrate with real world examples of what you're doing in your library to help support that and how we support students' literacy efforts. It's about communication.
Thank you, Rick. We have 3 more questions. Next one is, how can we help students who struggle with decoding skills engage with nonfiction books in a meaningful way?
So that's always been a problem when I can whether it's decoding books or non-decoding books. When I worked in an elementary school and I had third graders that struggled to read, that were expected to read, we had to find other methods in order to at least get the content to them. Um, since what I was describing today is not literacy instruction around word recognition, in my library, I would still continue to pair students up where they can work together. That's why oftentimes I would give options to students to work with a partner or independently. There were times where I had people work independently and other times when everyone had to work with a partner. But it may mean that as the librarian, I have to scaffold their project a little more. I may have some things off to the side that are more high-low type materials. Um, and maybe we have something with some audio support. So maybe I have some ebooks or a web resource that can use a text-to-speech feature. Remember, that top part of Scarborough's rope doesn't mean that they are proficient readers. It means that we're trying to provide them additional skills so that when they become proficient readers, that they are able to understand what they read, that they've gained the content knowledge needed to understand the content that they're reading as well.
Great, thank you. What strategies can we use to integrate more inquiry-based learning into our library programs, especially when time is limited?
Repeat that again. I'm sorry.
Sure, sorry. What strategies can we use to integrate more inquiry-based learning into our library programs, especially
Oh,
when our time is limited?
so working with inquiry-based learning, sometimes we have this perception that it's this, project that is going to take me 4 weeks in the library to complete. We're going to write a report. We're going to create a PowerPoint. We're going to do a presentation. And inquiry-based learning does not have to be at that level. Think about the mini projects that I was sharing today. These can be done in 1 to 2 different lesson settings, depending on how long you have your students. And I would definitely think about how do we use graphic organizers to center thinking, to help our students center their thinking around. Venn diagrams for compare and contrast is great, but we can also, with narrative text, we can do story trees. We can do a lot of different types of graphic organizers around that. So, the other way that I can embed in inquiry-based learning is I take a look at standards. I look to see what is it that our students are supposed to learn in their content, whether it's in social studies or in science. And I use that as a place for them to investigate. So, think about life cycles in grades 2 and 3. In most states, either in grade 2 or grade 3, they're introduced or studied. And part of inquiry would be, well, compare and contrast different life cycles or investigate a specific animals. So those are definitely some ways that we can encourage inquiry-based learning in libraries.
Thank you. And then our final question, if we don't have any additional questions that come through the Q&A, do you have any recommendations for nonfiction books or series that are particularly effective in supporting structured literacy in different grade levels?
So um, there are a lot of options out there. And what I tell people is to identify when you're looking at books to consider to include in your library that can help structured literacy, make sure that they have great text features. Make sure that if they're fiction, that they have great narratives, that you have a variety of books that meet the different stages in which students are reading. I might get a little pushback on this, but I will say you should probably have some decodable books in your library that students can check out or parents can check out. this is no different than having easy readers in my library. And I can remember the Hillard books were something that I didn't think were great stories, but they were checked out by parents all the time because they were using them to help their students learn to read and for shared reading in the home. So I believe that, having some level of decodables that can be checked out by students or parents are very important. But also take a look at just the series. Look for high quality materials. Librarians know what they look like, or should know what those look like. Um, Now, of course, I'm going to put a plug in for FlutterBee. Everything we have is great. But depending on my reader, we have high-low, and I saw the question about high-low. We do have high-low series. We do have curriculum aligned series. We also have just high interest series. Make sure that what you're including in your library is a little bit of everything, and make sure that your students have fun reading it. So that's how I would respond to that. Any other questions, Marie?
Thank you. Let me just check our Q&A. It looks like, unless anybody has some last minute questions, that kind of wraps up our Q&A. Again, we'll be sending out an email after this presentation that will include the recording, a title list, and other resources related to the presentation you just saw. And we also have a survey that will be included that you can send us your feedback on today's webinar and enter for a chance to win the books that we discussed today. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to either me or Rick, and we are just so appreciative that you're here today, that you joined us, and we hope you found something useful. Any final thoughts, Rick?
No, just go out and do what you do. I mean, it's that I think being given permission to say what we've been doing has always been in support of great literacy practices is refreshing. And that's what I want to leave you with.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.